Plato, the dreamer who searched for truth. Imagine a young man walking through the busy streets of ancient Athens. Around him, fishermen sell their catch, children play in the dust, and old philosophers argue about life. But this young man sees something deeper. He wonders, what is truth? What is justice? Why do people choose right or wrong? This young man is Plato, one of the greatest thinkers in human history. His ideas shaped education, politics, science, and philosophy for thousands of years. But before he became a legend, Plato was simply a curious boy searching for meaning in a world full of confusion. Plato's name appears in textbooks, universities, and libraries all around the world. His ideas about knowledge, reality, government, and the human soul influenced almost every major thinker who came after him. People study his dialogues, admire his logic, and follow his questions. But behind the famous philosopher was a real human being, someone who lived through war, loss, disappointment, and personal crisis. Someone who wondered whether society could ever be truly fair or truly wise. Someone who searched not just for answers, but for a way of life. Before he became Plato the philosopher, he was simply a young man shaped by family, politics, and a teacher who would change his life forever, Socrates. To understand Plato's wisdom, we must begin with the city that shaped him, Athens. Part 1. A child of Athens, a student of chaos. Plato was born around 427 BCE in Athens, one of the most important cities of ancient Greece. Athens was famous for art, theater, democracy, and philosophy. It was a bright center of culture. But it was also a place of conflict. When Plato was still a child, the Peloponnesian War began, a long and painful conflict between Athens and Sparta. His family was noble, wealthy, and well-educated. They expected Plato to become a leader in politics, perhaps even a ruler someday. His relatives worked in government, and some were close to important politicians. Young Plato was intelligent, athletic, and curious. He studied poetry, music, and gymnastics. Teachers praised his memory and imagination. But behind the comfortable life of his childhood, shadows grew. The war changed everything. Athens suffered hunger, disease, fear, and political fighting. People blamed each other. Leaders argued. Democracy weakened. Plato watched his city fall into confusion. He wondered, why do governments fail? Why do good people suffer? Why does war never end? These questions stayed with him forever. When Plato was a teenager, he met a strange and fascinating man in the marketplace, a man with simple clothes, bare feet, and a habit of asking questions that confused everyone. His name was Socrates. Socrates did not teach in a school. He taught in the streets, speaking to anyone who would listen. He asked people, what is justice? What is goodness? What makes a life worth living? Most people avoided him. Some laughed at him, others feared him. But Plato felt something different: admiration. Plato followed Socrates like a student follows a master. He listened to every question, every argument, every conversation. Socrates taught Plato something powerful. Wisdom begins when you admit you do not know everything. This idea changed Plato's life. He no longer wanted to be a politician. He wanted to be a seeker of truth. But Athens was not kind to Socrates. Many politicians hated him. They blamed him for questioning their authority. They accused him of teaching young people to think too freely. When Plato was about 24 years old, something terrible happened. Socrates was arrested, put on trial, and sentenced to death. Plato watched the trial with pain and disbelief. He saw innocent wisdom destroyed by fear and ignorance. Socrates was forced to drink poison and died calmly among his followers. For Plato, the world collapsed. He lost his teacher. He lost his faith in Athenian politics. He lost his trust in leaders. But from this tragedy, a new purpose grew inside him, a purpose that would guide him for the rest of his life, to build a better world through philosophy. Part 2. After Socrates, the search for a better world. The death of Socrates was one of the darkest moments in Plato's life. He felt angry, confused, and disappointed with Athens. The city he loved, the home of democracy, art, and deep thinking, had killed the wisest man he had ever known. Plato realized something important. If the city could not understand Socrates, then the city was not as wise as it believed. And he began to ask a deeper question: what makes a government just? And what makes people truly wise? These questions pushed him into a new journey, a long search for truth that would take him far from Athens. After Socrates' death, Plato no longer trusted Athenian politics. He feared that the city's leaders were more interested in power than truth. So he left Athens and began traveling across the Greek world. He visited cities, temples, and schools. He spoke with priests, warriors, teachers, and travelers. Everywhere he went, he looked for ideas, stories, and wisdom that could explain the world. He traveled to Egypt, where he admired ancient knowledge about mathematics and the soul. He traveled to southern Italy, home of the Pythagoreans, a group that believed numbers shaped the universe. Their ideas about harmony, balance, and truth inspired Plato deeply. During these travels, Plato wrote his first dialogues, stories where Socrates asked questions and exposed false beliefs. Through writing, Plato kept his teacher alive. Years passed. Plato learned much about the world, but he also realized something else. Traveling brings knowledge, but true change requires action. So he returned to Athens with a powerful idea. He would build a school. This school would not teach politics, money, or power. It would teach wisdom. It would train young people to think clearly and live with reason and justice. It would be a place where people sought truth together. In 387 BCE, Plato founded the Academy, one of the first universities in history. The Academy was not like other schools. It had no desks, no strict rules, and no famous titles. Students walked through gardens, debated under trees, and questioned everything. They talked about mathematics, ethics, government, beauty, and the soul. Plato often walked among them, asking questions, challenging their ideas, and guiding them to think more deeply. At the Academy, Plato taught something important. The mind must be trained, just like the body. A strong mind leads to a strong life. One of his most famous students was Aristotle, who later became one of the greatest philosophers in history, showing how powerful Plato's influence was. At this time, Plato wrote one of his most famous works, The Republic. In it, he explored a bold idea. What would a perfect city look like? He imagined a place ruled by philosopher kings, leaders who loved truth more than power, people who understood justice, controlled their desires, and made decisions for the good of everyone, not for personal gain. Plato knew this idea was idealistic, maybe impossible, but he believed that imagining a better world was the first step toward creating one. His writing in the Republic included one of the most famous stories in philosophy, the Allegory of the Cave, where prisoners mistake shadows for reality until one man escapes and learns the truth. This story became one of the world's greatest metaphors for education, knowledge, and enlightenment. Plato believed so strongly in the idea of philosopher kings that he attempted something risky. He traveled to Syracuse, a powerful city in Sicily, where the young prince Dionysius II had recently become ruler. Plato hoped he could turn the prince into a wise leader, a real philosopher king, but reality was harsh. Dionysius was not interested in wisdom. He wanted luxury, power, and loyalty. He did not want questions or lessons. Tension grew quickly. Plato argued with advisors, angered politicians, and struggled to teach the prince anything meaningful. The experiment failed. Plato was placed under suspicion and nearly killed. He escaped only with the help of a friend. This painful experience taught him a difficult lesson. Not everyone is ready for wisdom, no matter how hard you try to teach them. After this failure, Plato returned to the Academy. He continued teaching, writing, and guiding students. He wrote works about love, politics, knowledge, reality, and the soul. His dialogues grew deeper, richer, and more creative. The older he grew, the more he understood something essential. The world may never be perfect, but every person can make their own mind wiser and kinder. Plato decided his life was not about building a perfect city. It was about helping people learn how to live well and think clearly. His wisdom began shaping the future of philosophy, science, and education, a legacy that would continue long after his lifetime. Part 3. The World of Ideas and the Search for the Invisible Truth. Plato spent most of his adult life teaching at the Academy. Every day, He walked through the olive trees and marble paths, talking with students, asking questions, and exploring big ideas about life. He believed that philosophy was not just something you studied, it was something you lived. But what truly made Plato different from others was his belief that the visible world was only a small part of reality. Behind everything we see, he believed, there was a deeper invisible truth. This idea became the center of his philosophy. Plato looked at the everyday world, people, objects, buildings, nature, and saw something interesting. Everything changes. A child grows old. A flower blooms, then dies. A city rises, then falls. Even opinions change from person to person. Plato asked himself, if everything we see changes, how can we ever know true, stable truth? This question led him to one of his most famous ideas, the theory of forms. Plato believed that everything in the physical world was only a copy of something perfect and unchanging. He called these perfect things forms. For example, a real circle drawn in the sand may be uneven or messy, but the idea of a perfect circle, the form, never changes. A beautiful person may grow old, but the idea of beauty itself remains pure. A just action may be complicated, but the idea of justice is always constant. Plato believed the form of something was more real than the physical object itself. The object could disappear, but the form would always exist. This idea shocked many people in Athens. Some didn't understand it. Others thought it was too strange. But Plato insisted, yes, the mind can see something the eyes cannot. Plato also believed that the soul was eternal. Before entering the body, he said, the soul lived in a world of perfect forms. There it saw true beauty, true justice, true goodness. But when the soul entered the human body, it forgot those truths. Life became a journey, a path of remembering what the soul once knew. Every time someone learned something, Plato believed, they were actually remembering a truth buried inside their soul. This idea gave learning a powerful meaning. It was not about memorizing facts. It was about awakening something deep inside. To explain his ideas, Plato wrote one of the most famous stories in all philosophy, the Allegory of the Cave. He described prisoners chained inside a dark cave. They faced a wall, and behind them a fire cast shadows of objects. The prisoners believed the shadows were real because they had never seen anything else. One prisoner escapes. He leaves the cave and enters the sunlight. At first, the light hurts his eyes, but slowly, he sees real objects, trees, mountains, animals, not just shadows. When he returns to the cave to tell the others, they laugh at him. They prefer the shadows. They do not want to believe there is a bigger world. Plato said that most people live like the prisoners, seeing only shadows of reality. Philosophers are the ones who escape the cave. They see the truth and must help others see it too, even if people resist. This powerful story became a symbol of education, wisdom, and enlightenment for thousands of years. Plato believed philosophers had a special duty. They must look beyond the world of appearances and search for truth. They must rise above emotions, illusions, and selfish desires. A philosopher should think clearly, live simply, seek truth, avoid corruption, help others grow. He believed that only people who understood truth should lead society, not because they wanted power, but because they understood what was truly good. This idea shaped his concept of the philosopher king, a dream leader who ruled with wisdom rather than desire. Not everyone admired Plato's ideas. Some Athenians believed he was too idealistic, dreaming of perfect societies that could never exist. Others believed he was too critical of democracy. Even his student Aristotle disagreed with many of his thoughts. But disagreement did not bother Plato. For him, questioning was a sign of learning. He often said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." These were the final words of Socrates. Plato wanted every person, young or old, rich or poor, to think deeply and live with purpose. Throughout this period of his life, Plato wrote many of his famous dialogues: Phaedo, Symposium, Republic, Meno, Phaedrus, and more. He used conversations, not lectures, because he believed truth grows through discussion. Every dialogue was an invitation. Come. Think with me. Ask questions. Look deeper. His academy became a place where minds woke up, where curiosity became power, and where young thinkers began to shape the future. Plato's search for truth had only begun. In the next stage of his life, he would face new challenges, refine his ideas, and leave a mark that would echo for thousands of years. Part 4. The Elder Philosopher, the Deeper Questions, and the Wisdom of a Lifetime. As Plato grew older, the academy became the center of his world. He no longer traveled from city to city. Instead, students traveled from across Greece, Sicily, Asia Minor, and beyond just to hear him speak. Some came for months. Others stayed for years. A few never left. Plato became the, quote, elder philosopher, a respected figure with white hair and calm eyes. Yet inside him, the same fiery curiosity from his youth still burned. He continued questioning everything: justice, beauty, love, knowledge, the soul, and the purpose of life. Plato wrote his dialogues in stages. The early dialogues were full of Socrates' ideas. The middle dialogues explored grand theories, like the forms, the soul, and the ideal city. But as he aged, Plato's writing changed again. It became more careful, more complex, and more open to new questions. He understood something important. Wisdom is not about having the final answer. It is about seeing deeper into the question. This new stage of thinking led Plato to write some of his most important works. In the symposium, Plato explored a topic close to every human heart: love. He described love not as simple emotion, but as a journey, a ladder that leads the soul from physical desire to spiritual beauty. The ladder begins with love for one beautiful person, then love for all beautiful bodies, then love for beautiful minds, and finally love for beauty itself, the pure, eternal form. Plato believed that true love helps the soul grow. It leads us beyond our selfish desires and towards something higher, something eternal. This idea shaped how many future societies understood love, friendship, and relationships. In Phaedrus, Plato described the soul as a chariot pulled by two horses, one noble and controlled, the other wild and emotional. The charioteer, the mind, tries to balance both, guiding the soul upward toward truth. Sometimes the soul rises, sometimes it falls, but the journey continues through many lives. This metaphor became one of the most poetic explanations of the human struggle, the fight between reason and desire, light and shadow. Plato never forgot his failure in Syracuse. Trying to turn a real-world ruler into a philosopher king taught him that perfect ideas are difficult in imperfect societies. So, in his later years, Plato wrote The Laws, a more practical guide to building a good society. It was less dreamy and more realistic. Instead of philosopher kings, he imagined a city with strong laws, wise teachers, and a balanced government that encouraged virtue. This showed that Plato's thinking matured. He now understood that human nature required structure, education, and guidance. The academy continued growing. Students studied mathematics, astronomy, music, logic, ethics, and politics. Plato believed that all these subjects helped the mind find truth. He encouraged debate, calm discussion, and difficult questions. He rarely gave direct answers. Instead, he answered with another question, pushing students to discover truth for themselves. Sometimes students grew frustrated, but later they realized the purpose. Plato wanted them to learn how to think, not what to think. The academy became a symbol of free thought, intellectual discipline, and the love of wisdom, the original meaning of the word philosophy. Plato lived during a time of political and cultural change. Athens was no longer the strongest Greek city. Macedonia, under King Philip II, was rising. The world Plato knew from his youth was shifting. But rather than fearing change, Plato studied it. He believed every era had lessons, even the difficult ones. He often said that societies fail when they forget wisdom and justice, when people desire power over truth, when education becomes entertainment instead of enlightenment. These lessons came from his youth, from the death of Socrates, and from a lifetime of observing human behavior. As the years passed, Plato became a figure of respect and quiet authority. Students spoke softly around him. Visitors treated him like a wise elder. Some described him as gentle and kind. Others thought he was serious and distant. But those close to him knew he still laughed, enjoyed friendships, and loved learning new things every day. He lived simply, no luxury, no political power, no personal wealth. His richness was the life of the mind. Even as an old man, Plato continued writing. His final dialogues explored memory, logic, the nature of the universe, and the foundations of good government. His mind never rested. In his last years, Plato understood something profound. The world is imperfect, but the human mind can rise above imperfection. People may argue, governments may fail, empires may fall, but truth, beauty, and goodness, the forms, remain eternal, and the soul, through love of wisdom, can grow closer to that eternal reality. Plato hoped future thinkers would continue asking questions, continue seeking truth, and continue building a more just world. He did not want people to follow him blindly. He wanted them to think deeply. Always. Part 5. The legacy of a thinker who shaped the human mind. Plato lived many decades beyond the death of Socrates, teaching, writing, and guiding the academy. His life became a long conversation with the world, a conversation about truth, justice, love, knowledge, and the soul. When he finally grew old, with white hair and a gentle smile, his students saw not just a teacher, but a man who had lived fully with purpose. Plato died around 347 BCE, but his ideas were only beginning their journey. His legacy would spread across civilizations, languages, and centuries, shaping the minds of people who lived long after the fall of Athens. The rise of Rome, the birth of Christianity, the growth of science, and even the modern world we live in today. One of Plato's greatest achievements was his influence on his students. The most famous of them was Aristotle, who studied at the academy for 20 years before becoming a philosopher in his own right. Aristotle carried Plato's questions into new fields: biology, politics, logic, and ethics, and became one of history's most influential thinkers. Many of Aristotle's ideas later inspired great leaders like Alexander the Great. In this way, Plato's influence spread not only through books, but through the people he shaped. Plato once wrote that education was the turning of the soul. Through his students, he turned many souls toward wisdom. For hundreds of years after Plato's death, his works were copied, studied, and debated. When the Roman Empire rose, philosophers in Rome read Plato. When Christianity spread, theologians read Plato to understand the soul and the idea of a higher world. Later, during the Renaissance, artists and scientists rediscovered Plato's ideas and used them to inspire creativity and innovation. Even today, universities around the world teach the Republic, Symposium, and Phaedrus. Students still study the Allegory of the Cave. Writers still quote his dialogues. Scientists still admire his love of mathematics, and teachers still follow his method of learning through questions. Plato's voice never faded. Plato's vision of a perfect city, ruled by philosopher kings, became one of the most influential political ideas in history. Even though his ideal city was never built, his questions about justice, leadership, and good government shaped political thinkers for thousands of years. Some agreed with him, some disagreed, but everyone learned from him. His belief that leaders should be wise, not just powerful, remains one of the most important lessons in political philosophy. Today, people ask the same questions Plato asked. What is justice? What makes a good leader? How can society live in peace? Plato taught the world that a civilization without wisdom cannot survive. Plato didn't only give answers, he gave the world a method. He taught people to ask questions, challenge beliefs, seek deeper meaning, never accept easy answers, look for the truth beneath appearances. This method is now called the Socratic method, in honor of his teacher. It remains the core of modern education, used in classrooms, courts, scientific research, and philosophy programs everywhere. Every time a teacher asks a student, "Why do you think that?" Every time a scientist questions a theory, every time a student debates an idea, Plato's influence is there. Plato believed the soul was eternal, searching for truth across many lifetimes. He wrote that the soul is like a traveler moving from darkness to light, always learning, always remembering. This idea inspired later religions, poets, and psychologists. He taught that the soul grows through wisdom, beauty, and goodness, and that every person has the power to improve themselves through effort and reflection. Plato's message was clear. Your mind is powerful. Your choices create your character. Your inner world shapes your outer world. Plato died peacefully, surrounded by students who admired him. Some said he died while listening to a musician play the flute. Others said he died while writing. No one knows for sure. What is certain is this: his life was a gift to human thought. He left behind dozens of dialogues. He founded a school that lasted for centuries. He shaped the future of philosophy, science, politics, and education. His questions still guide people today. Plato never conquered lands, he never commanded armies, he never ruled a nation. Yet he changed the world more deeply than many kings and emperors. Plato's story teaches that truth is worth seeking, even when it is difficult. Wisdom grows slowly, through questioning and reflection. Justice begins inside each person, not in laws or governments. And the soul becomes stronger when it follows goodness, beauty, and truth. His life shows that ideas can travel farther than armies, and questions can last longer than empires. Plato's journey reminds us that every human being, no matter their background, can choose to learn, to grow, and to look beyond the shadows toward the light. Plato's life began in a city shaken by war, and ended in a school filled with thinkers from many lands. Between those 2 points, he lived a journey shaped by questions more than answers. He watched his teacher die for the truth. He left politics to search for wisdom. He built a school where ideas mattered more than money or power. He imagined a world of justice, beauty, and goodness, not because the world was perfect, but because the human mind could imagine something better. Plato believed that behind the world of changing things, there is a deeper reality waiting to be understood. And he believed that every person carries a spark of that reality in their soul. His story is not the story of a warrior or a king. It is the story of a thinker, a man who changed the world with questions instead of weapons. More than 2,000 years later, his voice still guides students, leaders, writers, scientists, and dreamers. His life reminds us that learning is a lifelong journey, that thinking is an act of courage, and that the desire for truth is one of the most powerful forces in human history. Moral lesson. Plato's story teaches us. Wisdom begins with curiosity, the courage to ask why. Learning is not memorizing facts, but opening your mind to deeper truth. Justice requires understanding, not just rules or laws. A good life grows from balance between reason and desire, mind and heart. True love helps the soul rise, not fall. Even one person with good ideas can change the world for centuries. The search for truth never ends, and that is what makes life meaningful. Plato shows us that thinking is a form of bravery, and understanding yourself is the beginning of wisdom. Thank you for watching this Plato story on LinguaTales. If this narrative helped you learn English, or gave you new insight into one of the greatest thinkers of all time, please support the channel so we can keep creating meaningful, educational stories. Please like this video, subscribe to LinguaTales, turn on the notification bell for weekly stories. Share this video with friends, students, and anyone who loves philosophy, history, or deep storytelling. Before you go, here is your reflection question. Which idea from Plato inspired you the most? The allegory of the cave, the search for true beauty, or the dream of a just society? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your answer may inspire someone else on their path to wisdom.